Hello everybody and welcome to Gran Turismo Sport. I know, surprise surprise, but the day this video is going out marks the 3rd anniversary of the game's release, so I thought what better time to come back and look at the game in depth and kind of give a review 3 years on. So this is going to be quite a long video, I know that, so I will put timestamps in the description and you can flick along the video chapters if you want to hear my thoughts on a certain topic. But if you want just the too long didn't watch version, then yes, I enjoy Gran Turismo Sport. Of course I do. I wouldn't have made so many videos on it and played so much of it if I didn't. It's that simple, but it is a flawed game. There are a lot of problems with it and a lot of things that confuse me about it, and we're going to talk about all of that. So, let's get into it. And we're going to start, well, from the start, back in 2017 when the game was first released, because I think now it's almost easy to forget how bare bones this game was in terms of content at the start of its life. We had less than half the cars that we do now, considerably less tracks, and we didn't even have a career mode. And this is why a lot of fans, myself included, were feeling understandably shortchanged, because the game simply did not have enough content in the beginning. Now, if you were following the release, with the marketing and the trailers and whatnot, we knew this game was going to be something different. It's not a numbered title. We knew there were going to be a heavy esports focus, but where I think the problem lied for a lot of people is that we thought, okay, a Gran Turismo esports game, cool. But the problem was that Polyphony seemed to put all of their eggs in this esports basket and kind of abandoned any semblance of Gran Turismo and what people may have liked about the franchise in the past. However, an important thing to consider is that this game brought a whole new audience to Gran Turismo than we've had before because of that esports stuff. And despite any backlash from fans, suffice it to say, this game was not a flop commercially. It sold very well, it outsold GT6, and at this point, it's on its way to selling almost 10 million copies. But with that aside, this video is going to be coming at it from both angles. Is it a good racing game, and is it a good Gran Turismo game? But going back a minute to my point about there being a lack of content, let's focus on what we did and do have to work with. Because while this game was undeniably stripped back, and you could argue still is, there were plenty of new things that were welcome in GT Sport. And while not a new feature per se, undeniably at the top of that list, for me, is the improved physics. Because I think they nailed it. Well, almost. I think they struck the perfect balance between it being accessible enough for controller users and still allowing them to be relatively competitive, while still bringing a whole new level of realism that hadn't been seen in Gran Turismo before, and just making the driving experience a lot more engaging. I have to commend them for that, because physics are the most important part of any racing game. It's something they couldn't really afford to mess up, and thankfully they didn't. Each car feels different from the next, and in pretty much every case, the car behaves how you would assume and expect it would in real life, broadly speaking. Although of course, it's not perfect. There are a few issues. Now, I think if you want to notice the improvements in the physics over a previous Gran Turismo game, I think the best place to look is some of the classic road-going cars, and even slightly newer ones too, where there's a lot of body roll involved. They're a bit more loose and have softer handling characteristics. But in some cases, I think the roll and the pitch is exaggerated, and it makes cars handle in some curious ways. But the problem doesn't tend to apply to those classic cars that I mentioned. It normally applies to either front-wheel drive hot hatchbacks or mid-engine supercars. Because some of those hatchbacks, like the Alfa Mito for example, when you brake, the amount of dive and the amount the back comes up is a little bit ridiculous. And to a lesser extent with a mid-engine supercar, say the 2005 Ford GT, the rear squats a bit too much. Instead of kind of breaking traction when you floor it out of a corner with too much power, where you'd expect the car to slide, it just kind of squats on the rear wheels. Obviously that's where the weight is, so you'd expect it to do that to a certain extent, but it kind of squats too much, finds insane traction at the back, and just kind of rushes wide and understeers at the front. It must be said though that these are just a few isolated examples. There may be a few more as well, but overall they definitely have done a very good job. And if I was to make one other criticism, it would just be that the two-wheel drive cars, or the high-powered ones anyway, are a little bit too hard to launch with a controller. There's quite a fine line between not going anywhere because you didn't put enough power on, and completely setting the tyres alight. But it's nothing a little bit of traction control can't fix. Put it on 1 for a few seconds, and then take it back off again when you sped up, and you'll be gold. Another thing that's come a long way compared to the past is the graphics. From the cars to the tracks, pretty much everything looks great, and gone are the days of those standard cars. Obviously, that really wouldn't be acceptable on the PS4, but it does go some way, at least, to justifying the lack of cars compared to the previous games. And with Kaz's talk of future-proofing the car models, it seems as though we're playing the long game, and the cars that we have in GT Sport will all be able to be carried over to GT7 easily, and that should help the car list there, and when that game comes around, hopefully, things are looking pretty healthy by that point. But just going back to the graphics for a second, my only kind of minor complaint is that the grass and some of the off-track stuff can very occasionally look a little bit dodgy when you go into the photo mode and stuff, but overall, yeah, it's one of the best looking racing games out right now. It would also be remiss of me not to point out the massively improved car sounds, because they really have come a long way from previous Gran Turismo games. All the cars sound pretty much as you would expect them to. The sounds aren't very dramatic, you could argue they're a little bit muted sometimes, and a few of them have still that slightly synthetic vacuum cleaner-esque Gran Turismo edge to them. But overall, they really are very good, and as I found out when I made my top 10 best sounding cars recently, there really are some tasty sounding vehicles in this game, so much so that there might be a part 2 or even 3, so stay tuned for those. So we've established that the cars look great and for the most part are great to drive, but let's talk about the cars themselves, because as I said in the intro, there weren't too many at the beginning. I think it was about 160, 170, and now in 2020 that number has grown to 336. And you have to take into account that a good majority of those, maybe 60 to 70, are fictional cars, be it Vision Gran Turismos or the polyphony curated Group 4 and Group 3 cars. And that was right from the very beginning of the game, as of course the focus back then was even more on the race cars and the esports things. But somewhat weirdly, those cars are the cars that haven't really been given any attention in the update since the release of the game. We've had one new VGT that I can think of, being the Jaguar, no new Group 4 cars, and only 3 new Group 3 cars from existing manufacturers that already had one, being Mazda with the RX Vision concept, Aston Martin with the DBR9 GT1, and McLaren with the F1 GTR. Now, if we just think about those 3 cars for a second, they're all very different, but they're in the same class, which highlights a bit of a problem, a bit of a curiosity, we could say, with this new classification system of the Group 1, 2, 3, 4 and the N-class stuff that was obviously new for GT Sport and wasn't in previous Gran Turismo. Obviously there's a balance of performance to help level things out, but it is very, very strange that modern GTE cars, GT3 cars, Vision Gran Turismo cars, old GT1 cars, and even older stuff like the McLaren all ends up in the same class, just thrown together. Now I understand it makes more sense in the context of sport mode. Yeah, it is very weird that they have such rigid classes when the logic behind what car goes in what class is a lot more loose. It's the same story with the Group 1 cars as well. I think those are the two classes where it's highlighted the most, because you have Group C cars from the late 80s, some LMP cars from the late 2000s, modern Le Mans cars, as well as futuristic Vision GT cars. It's like 30-40 years worth of machinery in the same class. Which, in a weird kind of way, is more Gran Turismo, because they've always had those kind of eclectic championships of all different kinds of race cars going at it in the same race. Just this time around, its application has been a lot more clumsy and made a lot less sense. I don't see why they didn't just carry over the performance point system, and I definitely see why it's coming back to GT7. It makes a lot more sense, and that's especially apparent when you get into the road cars. Because, oh boy, the N-Class system is frankly stupid. Since when is a car's power output indicative of its performance overall? Why is a modified Ford Raptor able to be in the same class as a Pagani Huayra? It's like that old saying, why are you judging a fish by its ability to climb a tree? Because some cars are just going to seem like stupid choices and aren't going to be used as much as they should be. Which is a bit of a shame, honestly. Now, just with the race cars, there is balance of performance, but A, it doesn't really work with the road cars, and secondly, it's basically never applied. It's not applied at all in the career mode, and with sport stuff, I can't remember the last time it was. The performance point system would just be an infinitely better fit. Front wheel drive cars would stand a chance once again, and while they might still be the old OP car here and there, it would be a lot less common, and it'd be a lot less easy to predict what type of car it is. Because with the way things are now, you can bet your bottom dollar it's probably mid-engined, rear-wheel drive, lightweight, or a Porsche. With that being said though, it's great that Porsche are finally in a Gran Turismo game. It's been a long time coming, and I guess you could say this is compensation in a way. Bloody EA. But I digress. Because I'm not done ranting about the class system just yet, because while I guess within the power system it makes more sense what cars are in what classes, that doesn't mean it's still a little bit weird at times, because why is the Mazda Roadster touring car in N200? The clue's in the name. Touring car. So to put that in the road classes is, well, stupid. And I don't even think that is the biggest failing of the classification system, because there's Group X. The infamous dumping ground of GT Sport, where whatever they find that doesn't fit in their predetermined classes just gets chucked in there. Anything from a BMW i3 to a Tomahawk. Now, stuff like that Tomahawk X and the Chaparral car, for example, makes sense to be in that kind of X, aside from everything else category. But it's not just those kind of cars. All the electric cars are in there, the i3, the Tesla, the Taycan, and other things like classic race cars as well, from the Renault Gordini to the Jaguar XJ13. It's just one massive dumping ground for the cars that don't fit in with these classes, and because of the way the game works with the career and sport mode, most of them, aside from the Formula cars, are pretty much rendered entirely useless, because you can't really use them for anything, and Polyphony don't really curate any events where they can be used, aside of a few exceptions like the Nostalgic Cup in the career mode. Yeah, I definitely think the old way would make the most sense. Just apply the performance point system and let common sense dictate which cars can compete against one another. Because with this classification system, they're alienating a lot of different cars because they would just end up in that Group X dumping ground, and a lot of different categories of race cars as well. Like, there's no DTM cars, which could probably fit into the Group 2 with the Super GT cars, because that's about the only class in the game that makes sense. There's no WRC cars, because they wouldn't fit in with the fictionalized Group B cars, etc, etc. NASCAR was reportedly supposed to be in the game, it's in the credits, but it never showed up, because where would they go, Group X, unless they went into their own class, and so on and so forth. Speaking of things that were supposed to come to the game, how about Formula E was reportedly coming and never did. We are past the deadline for the Lamborghini Vision Gran Turismo, way past the deadline for the Time-Attack Civic, and I'm pretty sure we won't see the Porsche Vision Gran Turismo either. Yeah, the list goes on. I mean, they said GT Sport is going to have 500 cars by the end of its life, and I highly doubt that's going to happen. Hell, I think GT7 is going to be barely scraping that number. I'll stop moaning for a minute, because overall, I do have to really commend Polyphony for the updates. They've, as I said, they've doubled the car list, they've added quite a few tracks and an entire career mode, more on that later, and it's all been free. And at the start, there was big amounts of content dropping monthly. Well, I say at the start, but they kept that going for over 18 months before the content levels started to drop off. But all of this to say that Polyphony's communication with the community hasn't been the best. But then again, it never has been, which isn't an excuse, but what really were we expecting? I think overall they've probably listened to the fans with this game more than they have any other in recent times, with some of the cars that have been added that people were really hoping for. It may have taken them a while, but we got an E30 M3, we got the Sylvia back, we got Spa back, and yeah, they've done a decent job with serving the fans and giving them content that we would want, or want back in a lot of cases. But there are exceptions. Like, where's my Lexus LFA at? Or my Mazda RX-8? These seem like obvious choices. They are both premium cars in GT6, both very highly requested, especially that LFA, and as far as the Mazda goes, Gran Turismo and Mazda have a partnership currently, so I really don't see what's going on there. But that's a small thing, and as I said, overall they have done a very good job with the update, especially throughout 2018, they were killing it. Though when you look back at some of the content that was added, it does go to show what wasn't there at launch, and you can be left kind of scratching your head just thinking, why wasn't this here from the very get-go? Hey, that's all in the past now, and if you're looking to buy the game at the moment, you won't have to worry about that. When you pick up the game, what are you going to be doing? Well, you can either go down the campaign or the sport route. You'll have to do some of the campaign anyway, but we're going to start with that, where there are your classic Gran Turismo licenses and mission challenges, although they are a lot less difficult to obtain those gold times than they were in previous games. GT Sport doesn't really have its own driving mission 34, that's for sure. But in a way that kind of makes sense, as this was intended to be done at the very start of the game. This was the stuff that was here from launch before we had a career mode, which is the final part of the campaign mode. But also available from launch was circuit experience. Again, like the previous two, the times aren't that hard to obtain, but these are the kind of things that are intended to be done at the start of the game. And I do encourage doing it at the start of the game because you earn a lot of money from it, and it allows you to learn the circuit. I like circuit experience, I think it was a really good idea. Of course, early on in the game's life, the GT League career mode was added, and then of course expanded upon in future updates, but oh dear, it's not very good. And that's almost understandable because I don't think this game was ever intended to have a career mode in the first place, but it is one of the most boring career modes I've ever done. It's more just something else to do, and occasionally a necessary evil for earning money, with the Blue Moon Bay grinding method, for example. It's no more than that, a way to just pass time, because there isn't really a sense of achievement that you get from it, because A, the events aren't too hard, and you don't win any cars from it, and there are no championships to do like the previous games. But I imagine that's in no small part down to the fact that there's the daily workout feature, where when you drive 26 miles on that day, you win a car from the spinning wheel of 4 possible options, and it's both a great idea and stupid simultaneously. It's a great idea from a business perspective because you're getting people logging in every day and playing the game for the chance to win a nice car, but it's stupid because, well, you rarely do. It does seem very rigged, and it's very, very rare that you'll win a car over 1,000,000 credits, let alone one of the 20 million credit high rollers, like the Ferrari, the Ford, or the Jaguar. And with a smaller car list, you tend to get a lot of duplicate. If I get another Honda Fit, I'm going to have, well, a Fit. Yeah, it's a bit annoying and takes away from the enjoyment from it slightly, but it's no big deal in the grand scheme of things. Going back to the career mode for a second, what is a bigger deal is the fact that the AI suck. They are terrible. Now, that's kind of understandable, as I said earlier. The game wasn't really intended to have a career mode, so it makes sense, but they are just infuriating to race, because they're easily passable. They don't give you any competition in that way, but they just have no idea of your existence, and they take very, very weird lines and get in your way. The amount of times I've lost my clean race bonus and won an extra 50% from a career mode race because I've smashed into the back of one of them who's broke at the exit of a corner, yeah, it's silly. So when you're sick of that, you'll eventually go to sport mode, and what a treat you'll be in for there. And I don't really know what to say about sport mode that hasn't already been said. Yes, the penalty system is abysmal. There are no words to describe it. You can have some great races, but all it takes is one idiot, or even just one honest mistake, for it to all go wrong and become a very frustrating experience. You spend all this time getting your driver and sportsmanship rating up and racing clean and just trying to have fun, but that sportsmanship rating can go down a lot faster than it goes up, it seems like, and it's a lottery whether it was your fault or not when you do inevitably incur a penalty. And when and if your sportsmanship rating finally goes down, you can find yourself in a bit of a downward spiral, because now you're in a lobby with people that are deemed less clean, so you're more likely to be involved in incidents and get penalties, your fault or otherwise. And that's why I've personally given up with doing sport mode races at this point, because it's just not really that fun to do. I'll do the qualifying, but after that I'm done, because it just doesn't really seem worth it. Now, this is less likely to be a problem if you're one of the top drivers, in A+, with S sportsmanship, but that's the thing, we all can't be the best drivers, and some of us are probably better than what we're classified as based on our rating, because with the way it works, you can get very unlucky at times. And that's what baffles me about this game. It's Gran Turismo Sport. The esports staff and their penalty system is an integral part of what's going on, and yet they've messed it up. They've tweaked it now and then, but it's just gone from bad to worse, and it seems as though they can never get it right. Here's hoping they get it right in GT7, but they have completely ruined the sport mode experience most of the time with that damn penalty system. And another problem with the sport mode races is that the car and track combinations can be very repetitive. Occasionally you'll get outliers, but oftentimes when you jump into a new week, especially now, there's not going to be anything that hasn't gone before, and that kind of highlights how the track list, while okay, still isn't that strong, especially in terms of real world tracks. And I've thought personally that for a game with such FIA assisted esports aspects to it, the inclusion of so many fictional tracks does seem quite odd and not make much sense. Same thing applies to the fictionalized cars. Now, as a general rule, I don't have a problem with the Vision Gran Turismo cars. A lot of people do, but honestly, they don't bother me at all. They're a part of GT6, and I'm not surprised they're carrying on. My problem kind of centers around those Group 3 and Group 4 cars, because that's where things seem a bit odd, and as I explained earlier, the classes get all mixed up. Although I can't deny stuff like the Group 3 Beetle is kind of badass. One final thing regarding the sport mode though is the sport mode time trials, which I am actually a big fan of, because with one of the two every fortnight you get a chance to tune your car and go up against players from all around the world. I do like that challenge of being on your own and yet still in competition with people from around the world as well as your friends. One thing that GT Sport does do quite well, or definitely has done for me at least, is it makes you a better driver, and that is one great thing and something that does keep you coming back to the game to play it. And since I just mentioned it, let's talk about the tuning for a second, because they have done a good job with that. It's not too dissimilar to previous Gran Turismo games, but the tweaks you make do have an effect on your car and can really help you to bring out or eliminate any characteristics in your car's handling that you may want. It could be better explained, maybe, but that's why I've done so many GT Sports setups on this channel, because I want to help people out with them, because they really do have an effect on your car, and that's good. Although the upgrading is where it really falls short, because it's so basic. It's just two sliders for power and weight. Gone are all the individual upgrades for exhaust, turbos, brakes, etc, etc. And for a game that seems like it really wants you to zero in on certain aspects of your car, this was a curious absence, as well as the visual customization stuff when it comes to aero parts. Although, when it comes to visually customizing your car, we now of course have a livery editor, which is a great addition. I can't say it's something I use a lot, because in that area I am completely inept, but I know of people who spend a lot more time making liveries than they do actually racing. And there are plenty of people out there that create truly amazing stuff with livery editor. It's a good one. There's plenty to use, and I of course like the feature where you can upload your own files for decals. But it must be said that I really do hope they improve the Discover section and that community interface, because if you want to find something that wasn't uploaded recently, it's very clumsy, and yeah, it needs a lot more refining in that way, so you can sort by date created or something instead of having to manually click back like every couple of days. Because if you want to find something from, say, a year ago, you're going to be there forever, and it's just a real pain. When it comes to making pretty things and sharing it with the community, there's one final thing to discuss, and that's scapes. This is personally something I really like to play around with, And I think it was a great idea putting it in the game because, along with the livery editor, it brings another new audience to Gran Turismo who like being artistic and doing cool things with their cars. There's tons of locations, and that number of locations is set to double for GT7, reportedly. I do love how you can create these photorealistic images with the cars we have on offer and with your designs that you may have put on them. I also think this one was another good business move by Polyphony because you got all these people sharing their work not only to the Gran Turismo community bit in the game, but also to Instagram. There's been so many accounts that post really cool scape stuff. I mean, hell, I started off on Instagram before I started this YouTube channel, and yes, that is a shameless plug to go follow me. Link in the description. But on that self-promoting note, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good day. And just to reiterate one more time, the penalty system is